record reflect we are back in session. Parties and council are present. All members of our jury and our alternates are present. Did we have anything further for Mr. West?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to hand you what's been marked as Exhibit 423, which is the activity log that you testified about previously. Do you recall taking a look at that?
I do.
And then based on the back-end user notes, we determined that that was from the custom side of the account, right?
Yes.
And are you familiar with how checks are written and created on QuickBooks?
I am.
And have you done that actual process yourself before?
I have. I've used our demo product and played with the adding invoices, adding checks, and removing them.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to actually turn to February 1st of 2010 on that activity log that you have, and I'm going to put Exhibit 425 on the screen. Now, is this consistent with what you've seen in terms of creating and deletion of checks in QuickBooks?
Yes, this is an additional feature on the activity or audit log, as it's called today, that there's a link, and if you click that, you get this box that shows you the history of that transaction.
Okay, and in the audit history, I'm sorry, the log that you have is an activity log, is that correct?
It is.
And so typically if a user was looking at the activity log on the screen, what you just indicated is there's a link and you can click on that link and then that's where you get this audit history information, is that correct?
Yes, on the computer version of this, there's a column to the right of this piece of paper that has a view feature, and you click that and something of this nature would be produced.
Okay, and here we're looking at an exhibit, and I think it's on the screen directly in front of you. And again, this is Exhibit 425. Do you see this actual information from the audit history reflected in the activity history that you have?
I do.
Okay, and what can you tell us in terms of, is this accurate in terms of the fact that a check was created on February 1st, 2010 at 12:34?
Yes, that's what's reflected on the audit log or the activity log.
Okay, and it indicates to you, does it tell you who the check is actually to?
On the far right column, this doesn't have a header, I don't think it does. It has a name column, and under that name column is Charles Merritt.
Okay, and we see that reflected in this particular exhibit. You see under that February 1st where I'm pointing to, there's a certain data that's contained there. Do you see that?
Yes, the name of the type where the transaction is a check, the date, the amount, whether the check was printed, deposit, and then the name of the payer is to the right, or the name on the check.
Okay, and these records are actually stored by QuickBooks, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and does that also show that the record was deleted at 12:52?
It does.
Okay, and then moving on to the actual next exhibit, which is 426. Do you recognize that?
I do.
And is this check actually reflected on the activity log that you have as well?
Yes, it is.
And so this is a check that's created on February 1st of 2010, is that correct?
Yes.
And what time is that check deleted?
It is deleted at 12:47 p.m.
And that's reflected on your activity log?
Yes, and the activity log also shows the check number that was assigned to that check of 4092.
And who is that check to?
Charles Merritt.
Showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 427. Is this reflected, is this audit history reflected on the activity log?
Yes, shows a check was added at 11:27 on February 2nd.
And does it show that that check was deleted?
Yes, at 11:37 a.m.
And does it show who that check is to?
Yes, it's to Charles Merritt.
Showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 428. Is this reflected on the activity log?
Yes.
And can you tell us, and we'll go through the actual edits with Detective Hankey, but can you tell us when this check was created?
At 11:29 a.m.
And when was that check deleted?
11:37 a.m.
Who is that check made out to?
This was made out to Charles Merritt.
Showing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 429. Is this audit history reflected on the activity log that you have?
Yes, it is.
Can you tell us when this check was created?
At 7:59 p.m.
On what date?
on February 4th, 2010.
And was this check also deleted?
Yes, it was.
What time was that?
8:05 p.m.
Who is that check made out to?
Charles Merritt.
Showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 430 for identification purposes. Can you tell us if this is also reflected, if this audit history is also reflected on the activity log that you have?
Yes, it is.
And is this for a check that was created on February 5th of 2010 at 12:06 p.m.?
Yes, it is.
Can you tell us when this check was deleted?
(12:38 p.m. on February 5th.
And who is this check made out to?
Charles Merritt.
Showing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 431 for identification. Do you see the audit history for this particular check number reflected on the activity log?
Yes, I do.
Is that for a check created on February 5th of 2010 at 12:21 p.m.?
Yes.
And is that check also deleted on February 5th at 12:39?
Yes, it was.
And who is that check made out to?
Metro Sheet ME.
Okay. Showing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 432 for identification purposes. Is this check audit history reflected on the activity log?
Yes, it is.
Does that show a check added on February 5th, 2010 at 12:25 p.m.?
Yes.
And is that check deleted the same day at 12:38 p.m.?
Yes, it is.
And who is that check made out to?
Metro Sheet ME.
Showing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 433 for identification purposes. Is the audit history for this particular transaction reflected on the activity log?
Yes, it is.
Is that showing a check created on February 5th of 2010 at 12:29 p.m.?
Yes.
And is that check then deleted at 12:38 p.m.?
Yes.
Who is that check made out to?
Charles Merritt.
And on Exhibit 434, is this audit history reflected on the activity log that you have?
Yes, it is.
And does that show a check created on February 5th at 12:33?
Yes.
And is that check then deleted at 12:37 p.m.?
Yes, it is.
And who is that check made out to?
Charles Merritt.
And then lastly, showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 435. This is another check audit history. And can you tell us when this check was created?
February 8th, at 2:20 p.m.
And if that's 2010?
Yes,
And does it also show that this check is deleted?
yes it does.
What time is that?
At 2:25 p.m.
And who is that check made out to?
Charles Merritt.
Now, on the activity log that you are looking at, do you see any deleted checks prior to February 1st of 2010?
No deleted checks. There's one deleted payment,
Okay.
but that's the only deleted entry I see on this log.
And I'm going to actually approach you with a couple of exhibits. You can turn the lights on, actually. This is Exhibit 431 that you testified about previously. That was a check that was created. And it has a date of February 5th. Do you see that?
I do.
And when you look at the data that's contained on that particular audit history, does it have a different date for the check than the actual date of the history?
It does. The check date shows February 4th.
Okay. And then,
February 4th, 2010.
same thing for 432, if you can take a look at that and tell me if that particular audit history, if the check has a different date than the audit history.
It does. The check date is February 4th, 2010.
And the audit history is what date?
It is February 5th, 2010.
And then showing you what's been marked as 433, same question for that. Do we have an audit history date and a different check date?
Yes, the check date is February 4th, 2010, and the audit history date is February 5th, 2010.
Showing you what's been marked as 434. Does that have a different audit history date and check date?
Yes.
And can you tell us what those are?
The check date is February 4th, 2010, and the audit date is February 5th, 2010.
And then on the last exhibit, which is 435, can you tell us what the audit history is on that date and then the check date?
The audit history is February 8th, 2010, and the check date is February 4th, 2010.
Okay, and so when you look at this audit history, and we've seen February 5th and February 8th, and then we look and see that the check is dated for February 4th, does that indicate that the check has been backdated for that date?
Yes.
I have nothing, well, let me double check. I know they have more questions. Nothing further.
Ross?
Thank you. Okay, let me ask you a couple questions about this, the dating of the checks, okay? counsel brought up several different checks, and she said the audit history says February 5th, but the date on the check is February 4th. Do you recall that line of questioning?
Yes, I
Because
do.
you went through maybe, I don't know, 5 or 10 different checks.
Yes.
Whatever. Okay. I'm using QuickBooks, right? And I go to QuickBooks and I type in a vendor, correct, who the check is going to be payable to. In this case, let's say Charles Merritt. Okay? So on February 1st, or better yet, February 4th, I write a check to the vendor, Charles Merritt, and I date it February 4th, and I put it for $100. Okay? You with me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is that a yes?
Yes.
Okay. So I go to sleep, and I wake up the next morning, and I go back to QuickBooks, and I'm going to make another check to Charles Merritt. Will QuickBooks take me to the last check that was written to the vendor?
If you signed out, it would take you back to the entry screen, the dashboard.
Right, but I'll go to my vendor. Will it take me to the last check?
I don't know if it would or not.
Okay. If it took me to the last check, then I would still have that data up there, right, with the date of February 4th, even though it's the next day. And I would have $100 in there. And let's say the next day, I want to make it for $200. So I change the amount, correct?
The amount of that check.
Right?
Yes.
It'll be a new check though, because it's gonna, and I'm gonna print that check for $200. Okay, and I print it out. It'll show the date of February 4th, because I haven't changed the date. You with me so far?
Yes.
Okay. And I print out that check. And I have a check for $200. It is the next day, but it reflects, I just was lazy and I just used the same data that was up on the screen and I made a new amount.
Objection, speculation.
Sustained.
You can take data from previous uses on any given day in the future and just piggyback off that data. Can you not, using QuickBooks?
QuickBooks, from my hands-on experience, will populate data based on prior data. I don't know if it has the ability to replicate. It most likely does, where you could take an old transaction, but it would probably apply a new date.
How about this? How about if I did a vendor and I enter vendor data and I do all lowercase letters for that vendor. When I set up the vendor, let's say in this case it's Charles Merritt, and I make it all lowercase, that's how I set up the vendor information, correct?
Yes.
Every check I make after that will be in lowercase, will it not?
I don't know if we have a character checking or any type of modification. I would guess it would produce the check exactly how you put that data in.
It's going to look the same each time for the vendor that I choose, correct?
Objection, speculation.
Sustained.
Do you know whether or not it would contain, because the vendor information is the same once you enter that vendor data, correct? That doesn't change unless you change it.
If you chose the vendor out of a pre-recorded vendor list, then yes. If you hand entered it, then no.
Okay. So you said in your testimony that there was a vendor added on February 1st. Is that correct, on that activity log?
Objection, the state's testimony.
Overruled again, if that's correct.
I don't recall that we discussed a vendor on a particular date.
Let's see. You were showing exhibit 423, right?
I don't remember the vendor. I was thinking that was the number. Okay, which date?
Well, was a vendor added of Charles Merritt on February 1st?
Yes,
And is it in all lowercase letters?
it is.
Okay. So let's say 3 months later in May, I go to that vendor and I want to make a check to Charles Merritt. Will it display in all lowercase letters the way I set it up?
If you're pulling it out of the vendor list, I would believe it would show it the same way it was entered. But if you're entering it by hand, it may be different.
Okay, Mr. West, you with me? I'm saying a vendor was added. My question is prefaced on the basis that a vendor was added on February 1st, which you just testified to, right?
Yes,
Okay, and you said it's all lowercase letters, correct?
yes.
Okay, so a vendor has been added, and now 3 months later, I'm gonna go and make a check out to that vendor. Is it gonna be the same data that I entered in terms of the lowercase letters?
Objection asked and answered, speculation.
And was there another vendor added, Metro Sheet Metal, shortly thereafter?
Yes, on February 5th.
Okay, was that also all lowercase letters?
Yes, it is, was.
Okay. Thank you. Now, do you know whether or not this custom account was linked to a bank account?
I don't know.
Okay. Let's assume, for purposes of this question, that it's not linked to a bank account. Okay. QuickBooks is just a bookkeeping service and a data storage service, in a way, correct?
No, it's more than that.
It's an accounting tool.
It's more than just an accounting tool. There are other features that the product has.
Okay. If it's not attached to a bank account, when I write a check, does money come out of my account?
I don't know how it would.
Okay. So I can write 50 checks and delete 50 checks. If it's not attached to an account, nothing happens to the bank balance, correct?
Objection, relevance.
The objection sustained. This calls for speculation and conclusion.
Well, if it's not attached to a bank account, are the bank balances affected by what I do on QuickBooks?
Objection, speculation.
Overruled again, if you will.
Well, the balance that's in the product is based on the information you put in if it's not linked to an account. I believe there's a way to print checks without having it linked to an account, i.e. a check stock. So if you had a printer and you had check stock, you could print that information on a piece of paper or a check.
And that's the function of QuickBooks, right? That's what QuickBooks can do, correct?
Yes.
But that function won't change my bank balance if it's not linked to an account, will it?
No.
Now, let's say I write a check in QuickBooks and I delete it. Let's say I delete 5 of them, or 10 of them, right?
Yes.
I go to the bank and I cash those checks. Okay? Now, QuickBooks doesn't have any way of hiding the fact that I cashed it at the bank, does it?
Objection, speculation, argumentative.
Sustained. This calling for speculation and conclusion.
If the,
And vague.
if the QuickBooks account is not attached to a bank account, and I write checks and I delete them, say I do that all day long at QuickBooks. My QuickBooks account, I'm writing checks and I'm deleting them all day. But I go to the bank and I cash those checks that I wrote and deleted off QuickBooks. My activity on QuickBooks won't change the fact that all of that is being recorded at the bank, correct? If it's not linked, if the QuickBooks is not linked to a bank account.
I'm a bit confused about your question. But the bank does their record keeping, and whatever the user does within QuickBooks is what the user does.
Okay. So deleting a check that I've written on QuickBooks, to your knowledge, if that QuickBooks account is not linked to a bank account, would not have any effect on the bank records, correct?
The bank records would be independent of the QuickBooks account.
Okay. Now, the audit history that counsel provided to you for several checks. Do you know if any of these checks were printed?
From I think the only way I would know, and I don't have firsthand knowledge of that, would be what that audit log indicates.
she showed you these specific exhibits, right?
Yes.
And it has a section where I guess it says check printed. I guess that's a question.
I believe
A
that's
field.
Yeah, it's, and the field says check printed, and the data in the field is to be printed.
So do you know if any of those checks were actually printed by looking at that audit history?
They all say to be printed on the face of this. Let me look at, there's another document back here. Behind this, and it appears to be related, it shows that it was printed. And so there's additional documents behind each of these cover sheets that I looked at.
Okay. But do you know if any of these checks, do you actually know if any of those checks were printed?
Well, I would have no idea of that.
Do you know if any of those checks were cashed?
I don't have visibility of that.
I'll put it back. I'm going to go to one of these audit issues again, sorry. 425. So you mentioned some documents on the back, correct? Behind the first page that council showed you?
Yes.
Okay. So you went to the second page, right?
Yes.
Okay, and then you said that that was printed, right?
It displays printed.
Display's printed. But you said you don't know if it was actually printed,
I don't.
right? You didn't know that, right? And then we go, there's actually another page behind that, right? And it says, does it say printed again? What does it say now?
It says to be printed.
So do you know what that means?
I don't.
Do you know what any of this means?
What do you mean by that?
Like whether it was printed or not? When it says to be printed, then to be printed.
What appears it's a status within the product, but what checks were printed or not printed, I don't know.
Okay, but how could you have something to be printed, that would be the status, then it shows printed on the second page, then it goes back to be printed? Do you know why it does that?
I don't. It's obviously a user-induced feature.
Okay.
You know, we see additional loggings as those occur, but why they're occurring, I'd have to watch, look at the product and see why that's occurring.
Okay. And you didn't do that in this case, correct? I mean, you didn't look at the actual account?
No, I didn't.
Okay, thank you. Since this was QuickBooks Online, do you know whether or not the IP address would be tracked?
Yes, it probably would be.
Do you know what I mean by the IP address?
I do.
Okay. That's where for the jury, that would be where the computer activity is actually taking place?
The origin of computer activity, yes.
Okay. And to your knowledge, QuickBooks Online would track the IP address where that came from, correct?
They would most likely track the login information, so how that person entered our system. They may not track an IP to individual transactions, but their login would be tracked.
So on that activity log where we saw multiple places where it says Joseph McStay signed in or something like that, on that activity log, would each time that person signed in, would we have an IP address from where it came from?
There should be. It's not 100%, but there should be an IP address associated with that login.
Okay. And you don't know in this case where the IP address was for these various logins?
I don't.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Anything else?
So just to clarify on the documents that you were testifying about, where we see these different edits. You were asked some questions about, and showing you 425, about some information contained on the audit history, and specifically talked about the first page, and then the second page shows the status printed. And if you turn to the next page, there's another edit. Would that be correct? Is that the information that's being captured on that?
Yes.
And the information that's captured is, we see that the check number has been removed from that, right?
Yes.
And then it changes to be printed, correct?
Yes, it does.
Okay, and then the last transaction, of course, is that whole thing is deleted, right?
Correct. The top page says that.
And even though it's deleted, that information is still captured within QuickBooks and within the audit history of that particular transaction, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So what we just discussed is, we see this where it actually shows on page 2 of 425, it shows that the check was printed, and then there's a particular check number, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then if you flip to the third page of that exhibit, which we didn't do with you initially when we went through them, if we go to the last page, we see that there's another edit made by the user, right?
Yes.
Okay, and we see the check number deleted, and then it says to be printed because there's an edit there. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you know if the IP addresses are actually kept or if they're purged after a period of time?
I don't know the answer to that.
I don't have anything further.
Anything else?
The council showed you 425. Just, you said that there's original data entered, then she said something about an edit. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is that an edit that happens after the original is done?
That would be what an edit is. So some data was placed in and then somebody changed it.
Okay. Do you know, and you wouldn't know when it was changed, correct?
I believe that audit log would reflect activity date and time.
Does the audit log capture the edited information?
Would appear from those exhibits that the information that changed would be the edited information.
And you wouldn't know who did the edits though, would you?
It's reflected on the audit log, so
You wouldn't know what individual did the edits. You just know from what account, correct?
we know only from
I should say signed.
the sign-in who actually was signed into the account, but the physical person doing that activity, I wouldn't know.
Okay.
The log wouldn't reflect that.
Okay. You can only say that in terms of who logged in, correct?
That,
I mean, you would have that information that this particular account was logged in on such and such date and time, correct?
correct.
Nothing.
Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
So the customer's QuickBook account is similar to a check register, is that right?
A sophisticated one.
Okay, all right. So when you say a check was deleted, that doesn't necessarily mean that the check was canceled, does it?
No. So within the product is very flexible, so you can enter it and then delete it. But if you printed it, if you did anything with that check, the check would still be available for negotiation.
So I can print a check, put it in my QuickBook account, send the check out to pay whoever it's going to be paid to, and then I decide, you know what? I don't want my wife to see that I spent this money, so I delete it from my QuickBook account. So when my wife looks at my QuickBook account, that check doesn't show up, right?
Correct.
But the check still went out and it got paid, right?
Correct.
Okay. And the QuickBook accounts that you have here, that you review, you don't know if those checks ever went out and were paid or not.
I don't.
Okay, I got you. Anything else?
Could the judge's wife find that the check had cleared in the bank account?
They always find out.
Do we have an answer from the witness?
I don't think so.
I'm the judge's wife, or?
I'll stipulate that you would find out.
I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Anything else?
Barring the judge's wife, just anyone would look on the account on that check that was negotiated, and they would go to a bank statement, and that check, of course, would be on the bank statement, correct?
If it was negotiated, yes.
Thank you. Nothing.
Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, any objections to Mr. West being excused?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you for your attendance, and you are excused.
Thank you. Thank you.
Make sure you don't take any of our exhibits with you. And do we have another witness for today?
People would ask to recall Sergeant Smith for a brief matter.
Okay.
Could you just restate your name for the record?
Ryan Smith, R-Y-A-N-S-M-I-T-H.
And you're reminded you are still under oath. And you may proceed.
Sergeant Smith, as part of the investigation, did you review the phone records that were testified to on January 31st, sorry?
Yes,
And as part of that, did you attempt to verify potential contact phone numbers for QuickBooks?
yes,
And in reviewing any of the cell phone records that were testified to on the 31st, were you able to find such a number?
yes, there were two numbers associated with QuickBooks.
I'm approaching you with Exhibit 439B, a copy of the AT&T phone records for 909-374-0102. And I've specifically turned to page 374 to speed this up. Did you locate that number on that page?
Yes,
Can you please highlight it for us? And then, once you've highlighted it, please tell us what date and time you located that record at.
the record is located on February 8th, 2010 at 03:11 p.m.
So 3 o'clock in the afternoon?
Yes, sir.
Was there other similar numbers around that time that could have been misconstrued as potentially being QuickBook numbers?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Were there similar numbers in or around that 3:11 PM call that looked visually almost identical?
Yes,
Were they like a digit off?
that is correct.
Okay. In between those calls, was there a call to a common number that most people would recognize?
Yes,
What number was that?
it was 1-800-555-1212.
Information.
Correct.
Was there a second day on February 9th, I think it's on the following page, where you were also able to determine a QuickBooks phone number was utilized?
Yes,
I'm sorry, back to the first one. What was that phone number? On the 8th.
the phone number from the 8th was 1-800-446-8848.
And then turning to the 9th, did you find were you able to determine another QuickBooks 1-800 number you utilized on the 9th in those records?
Yes, it was.
And what date and time was that?
That was February 9th, 2010 at 7:34 a.m.
And what was that number?
That number was 1-800-286-6800.
And how long was that phone call?
42 minutes and 56 seconds.
And I hate to be confusing you, jumping back to the call on the 8th, how long was that phone call?
That call was 107 minutes and 25 seconds.
Take that from me. I'm going to publish what you did on Exhibit 439B for the jury. Is what is being displayed out of 439B the February 8th, 2010 phone call you referenced to a 1-800 number associated with Intuit QuickBooks?
Yes,
That's the 107-minute call, correct?
correct.
And turning the page to page 375. Sorry.
You didn't ask me to highlight that one.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I not ask you to highlight that one? Let me have you highlight it so we can all pick it out of these minuscule lines of data. Thank you, sir. And now publishing to the jury, page 375, of the same exhibit 439B. That top line, is that displaying the February 9th, 2010 call to the 1-800 number you determined to belong to Intuit QuickBooks?
Yes,
And that was 42 minutes, 56 seconds.
that is correct.
Also in the course of your investigation, sorry, do you recall when Ms. Williams testified?
Yes, I do.
I'm going to display for you what is exhibit, I believe, 165. Mr. Jackson, we have a turning, whatever, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, today we're in Yosemite, sorry. Do you remember seeing this photograph?
Yes, I do.
And of note, I'm going to zoom in here. In the upper left-hand corner of that photograph was a business card attached to the Earth Inspired Products checkbook. You see that business card?
Yes, I do.
And that's for Union Bank of California in San Clemente.
That is correct.
You see the phone number, telephone number on that card.
Yes.
I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 442A, a couple pages from Joseph McStay's phone records. Did you find it contained on his phone records when you reviewed it?
Yes, I did.
Can you please highlight that for us? And while we're there, during the course of your investigation, did you determine there was a second phone number associated with that Union Bank office located on Joseph McStay's phone records?
Yes.
And how was it the same or different than the one that's depicted in the card?
It's the same with the exception of the last digit. The
Well,
last digit is changed to a 2.
To a 2, so 8092.
Correct.
Can you highlight that on the phone records, please? And when did those phone calls occur?
The first one occurred on February 4th, 2010 at 11:51 a.m. And lasted 2 minutes. The second also occurred on February 4th, 2010 and lasted 7 minutes.
7 minutes?
Correct.
Explain to the jury what Sergeant Smith highlighted on Exhibit 442A. If I can have Mr. Jackson the overhead back. Thank you. Last but not least, during the course of your investigation, did you determine any phone numbers associated with a Catherine Jarvis?
Yes.
And what were those numbers?
It was a 909 area code. I would have to look at the report to get the whole digits. I didn't memorize.
Would it refresh your recollection?
Yes.
Do you have that handy yet with you up there?
I did.
And with the court's permission review?
Sure.
Okay.
Is your memory refreshed?
Yes.
What is it?
It's 909-226-1197.
You said 1197. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Was there another number associated with that account as well under Catherine's name?
Yes.
And what was that?
Well, there are actually 3 numbers associated with it. Mr. Merritt's number, the number I just said, which was Catherine's primary number, as well as their daughter's phone number.
Okay, and their daughter's phone number was what?
909-285, and then I have to look for the last
Would it
one.
refresh your recollection to look at the report
Yes.
with the court's permission?
Sure.
Okay.
You got it?
I do.
What is that?
That's 909-374-8951.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Cross.
Yeah, immediate. Let's start with Exhibit 439B, which is the AT&T record for the phone number ending in 0102, correct?
I don't know what your exhibits are, but
It's the exhibit that was went over with Mr. Owens a short time ago, page 374, that you highlighted.
okay, yes, those were AT&T records.
And you highlighted a call on February 8th at 3:11 p.m. for 107 minutes, 25 seconds.
Yes, sir.
If the call was at 3:11 PM and lasted for 107 minutes and 25 seconds, when would that call end?
An hour, almost 2 hours. So an hour and 40 minutes, hour 47 minutes and 25 seconds later.
So 4:59, 4:58 or 4:59, depending on the second.
Yeah.
And do you know Joseph's cell phone number? That was listed on record 442A.
I know the beginning of it, 949, and I have to look to get you all of it.
Seeing that help refresh your memory?
Yes.
I believe it's listed on the top in bold. Let's
949-295-7451.
And Jackson, can we turn lights on so my old eyes can see? These are numbers, they're small. And looking again on exhibit 439B. So if the call that you highlighted, which is number 9539, correct? On the item number list? 9159, is that what I said?
9159.
Yes. So that's the 107-minute call, correct?
Yes, sir.
So if that call ended at 4:58, then there was, after that, at 5 o'clock, which number was called from 0102?
At 5 o'clock, you're saying?
Correct.
The 909-226-1197.
And that was Kathy Jarvis?
Yes, sir.
And then what was the next number called?
949-295-7451. The one associated with Joseph.
And how long was that call for?
52 seconds.
So whatever happened on the phone call to, as you say, is the number for QuickBooks, within 3 minutes of getting out the phone, these records show that whoever had this phone called Joseph's phone and spoke for 52 seconds.
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained disclosure.
That showed that the phone call that made the call to QuickBooks, within 3 minutes of getting off the line with QuickBooks, Joseph's McStay's phone was dialed and a conversation was had for 52 seconds.
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained as the conversation.
Okay, then there was the phones were connected for 52 seconds.
Yes.
Let's go to the following page. So again, this is the one you highlighted, item number 9167, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that was a call that was at 7:34 a.m., which you discerned was to QuickBooks,
Yes, sir.
and it was for almost 43 minutes.
Correct.
42 minutes, 56 seconds. So if the call started at 7:34 and was 43 minutes long, what time did the call end?
Killing me.
I know, right? Didn't know there'd be math today.
So, about 8:26 is,
8:13.
or 8:13.
Does that sound all right?
Yes, it does.
Okay, 8:13. And then after that call, was there phone calls made from this number?
Yes.
And that was to the number ending in 1197?
Correct, Ms. Jarvis.
And then it appeared Ms. Jarvis called him right back?
Yeah, there's 3 exchanges between the 2 numbers.
Back and forth, right?
That's what it indicates, yes.
And that was at 8:26, 8:29, and 8:54 respectively?
Yes, sir.
And then after that, what number was called?
949-295-7451.
Can you highlight that call, since you have your highlighter in hand? And how long did that call last? How long did the call last?
2 minutes and 3 seconds.
You can highlight, and that's items 9171, correct?
Yes, sir.
And if we can highlight the call before on the page previous. Which, there it is. Yes, item 9162, correct?
62 is driver's.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, 63. Now, lastly, on 442A, these are the phone records for Mr. McStay, Joseph McStay Sr., correct?
Yes, sir.
And you highlighted the 2 calls that were for the 809A and then the 8092.
Correct.
The first one has a letter in parens A.
Yes.
What does that say that type of call is in the bottom legend?
Indicates call waiting.
Do you know if that's an incoming or outgoing call? As if that was a call to him that was on his call waiting?
I would assume it's outgoing because on the records, when there's a call coming in, it indicates incoming. So I would assume it was an outgoing call and he was placed on hold.
Don't know for sure.
That's just based on my analysis.
We don't know if he spoke to anybody on that call, correct?
Correct. I would opine that he was placed on hold.
And February 4th, 2010, is your understanding of the case, is the date it was explained during the interview with my client that my client met with Mr. McStay for lunch, correct?
That's what Mr. Mayor said.
And that would be up in Rancho Cucamonga.
Yes, sir.
And then you see multiple calls at that time to Mr. Merritt. After those calls, you said in late hour of 11 o'clock in the morning, correct? So the next call he made after the bank call was to Mr. Merritt?
Correct, for 2 minutes.
And then he called some people in Minnesota, then Florida, right?
Yes, sir.
And then a 1-800 number for something,
Yes, sir.
and then retrieved his voicemail.
Yes, sir.
And that was after retrieving his voicemail right before, correct? Before the 11:51 call?
Yes, sir.
So is it safe to assume those A's are probably calls coming into him that left a voicemail, so he had to check it again?
Objection, that calls for speculation.
Sustained.
And then, looks like he
I would
called,
also note objection will be on the scope.
Overruled on that.
again, the 12:15 calls which you determined was the bank.
Yes, sir.
And then he called Dublin something or other in California.
Yes, sir.
Objection relevance beyond the scope.
Overruled.
And then he called Mr. Merritt's phone twice at 12:28 and 12:52, correct?
That is correct.
In the number that was on the business card, I'm not sure what exhibit that was that Mr. Ryan showed up.
165, sir.
Thank you. On 165, that was the business card that was found with the checkbook, correct?
Yes, sir.
And I believe, was that the one that was in the back pocket of the Isuzu Trooper?
Correct.
Of the passenger seat, if I remember correctly.
I believe so.
And the 8090, were you able to determine if that's the branch's general number or if that's Mr. Jerome Belen's desk number?
That was the general number.
So that's just the number for the branch.
Yes, sir.
And so the number that had the A next to it was that same general branch number, correct?
That had the,
The
The A?
The parent A.
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And it was the second call that had the 92.
Correct.
And did you verify if that 92 number is also associated with that same branch?
It's associated with Union Bank. I don't recall if it was the same branch or not.
But you did verify it's with Union Bank.
Yes, sir.
And is it common for businesses to have a main number and then numbers in sequence for the same location or same branch?
Yes.
The numbers you found associated to QuickBooks, the 1-800 numbers. Just a simple question, how did you determine what those numbers, how they were associated with QuickBooks?
They're actually still associated with QuickBooks. You can call them and it'll take you there.
Did you find that number called on other times from the AT&T records for my client's phone?
No.
So it's just the 8th and the 9th is the only 2 days?
Yes, sir.
So after each call, based on looking at this record, when he got off the phone after calling QuickBooks, he called Joseph McStay.
He called Miss Jarvis first, then he called Joseph.
And on the February 8th, 107-minute and 25-second call that lasted until 4:58. During that time, did he receive a call from Ms. Jarvis that went to his voicemail? Based on the testimony we heard from the AT&T custodian of records.
Yes.
So while he was on his phone, his wife called, he called her back.
Objection calls for speculation.
Well, based on the phone record, while he was on the phone with QuickBooks, he received a call from his wife, and the first call he made was to call his wife back.
Yes.
We're going to take our evening recess at this time. We have one juror who has a medical appointment tomorrow morning. So we're going to, instead of starting at 9:30 tomorrow morning, we're going to start at 11 a.m. So everyone gets a chance to sleep in just a little bit. So we'll be in recess until tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Again, keep in mind the admonitions previously given to you, not to form or express any opinions about the case, not to discuss the case or allow anyone to discuss the case with you in your presence. And we'll see everyone back at 11 a.m. tomorrow morning.